Well, Apollo, the first thing, and the reason I reached out to you, my broadcast partner, who I've had the honor to call your Olympic medals, but this film that we're going to see in America this coming week after we talk, The Weight of Gold, that you are a part of, one of an incredible array of Olympians and Olympic champions. What did you take away from participating? And I assume you've seen the film before the rest of us do.
So the film, The Weight of Gold, is it's interesting, and it's interesting not only because of the timing in which it's being released. It tackles, I think, an age-old challenge and issue that not only the Olympic space has been straddling and having to deal with for many, many decades. I think all sports, and now with everyone who is in the midst of COVID-19 and all of these other social conflicts that this country is going through, there is significant mental trauma and challenges that many people face. This film particularly concentrates on the struggle of athletes who are transitioning from sport into civilian life or the next path, are learning how to reinvent and pivot in their life, how to let go of one identity and form new ones. And then it talks about the actual disease that that really, attacks many people in this country. And that disease is these depressive mental health related issues. And athletes from the outside are optically looked at as being these superhero figures who are indestructible, when in fact, internally, they may be the most vulnerable. And because of the way that we have societal external signaling that really only celebrates you for the medal count, and not in terms of your effort or dedication, unfortunately, that can create these human conditional elements that I think later on in life proved to be quite challenging to rescript. So my involvement came because I had reached out to both two really close friends of mine. One, Jeremy Bloom, who was the incredible Olympics downhill freestyle moguls skier and NFL athlete, and now superstar entrepreneur, and Sasha Cohen, and also a luge athlete who I've become very close with. And so I actually didn't know this thing even existed previously. I had heard from a few people and through the Olympic grapevine that there was a doc going to be made about the kind of struggles and challenges associated in the Olympic space around mental health and awareness. And I reached out to Jeremy. I asked him to see a little bit more information. I started diving deeper, looking at the trailer, and I was like, hey man, whatever I can do to help, let me know. I'd love to kind of share my own personal experiences and struggles and challenges, to kind of bring and shed more light on an issue that I think hasn't been talked about on the Olympic stage, especially. We know how it's been talked about in relation to PTSD, with our country's great servicemen and servicewomen. We know how it's been in association with athletes who have issues in the NFL and the effects of kind of that trauma leading on later in their lives. But we don't hear about that in the Olympic space. And we're all human beings. And so that was something that I was really drawn to. So the experience itself was interesting because I had gone to Brett Rapkin's house, we was filming the doc, right? Mm-hmm. And as I walk up, and I open the door, there's Shaun White. And Shaun was like, hey man, what's up, bro? Right? In his very ever so cool, kind of charisma that is Shaun White. And I remember, just kind of thinking for a moment, I was like, man, like the public probably thinks that all of my Olympic brothers and sisters are really one big family, which we are. But I hadn't seen Shaun since he competed in Pyeongchang, I haven't seen Shaun in a long time. And I haven't hung out with Shaun in like 10 years. So I was like, oh wait, like that's interesting. Like, we've got this like revolving door of athletes where we all share the same, flag and the podium, but I don't really talk to anybody, and except for a very small handful of people. And what's interesting about that is that we all share a common theme, and that theme is this challenge that this doc is highlighting.
I love that analogy you just drew, because I think about this all the time in my life, and many like me. you're you and Sean White are part of an alumni association.
Mm.
Those of us that went to college, we have our alumni groups, and same thing. You may not see somebody for 10 years. You go to a reunion and you fall in like you haven't missed a beat. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming that's the same way
Yeah.
with you Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
But what Apollo, the thing I'm thinking about this film, and obviously Michael Phelps has been the most prominent in discussing this. And there is to me a bond because Michael was clearly the face of his sport in a way that no other Olympic athlete has been. You were the face of your sport. You in Salt Lake City competed before 17,000 people each night of short track. And it's largely, I'm going to say, it's largely because of you. And did you feel those burdens that you were carrying, not just your own hopes and perhaps expectations, but a sport on your shoulders?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I mean, I did. I was too young to fathom what that responsibility entailed. I think as my Olympic career continued, I looked at it in terms of a blessing, but it's a tremendous amount of pressure
Mm-hmm.
because we're human beings and you're looked at as this iconic status that represents our country and everything good about our country. And people who watch don't want you to make a mistake. They don't want you to lose. They don't want these things. And obviously, the media loves when someone rises to fame and then falls, but then they also love when that person comes back again. And so there's this ebb and flow. And so as an athlete, you don't know what that is. You don't know your expectations. And so you do feel like you're living in a glass bubble and everyone's watching your every single move. I do think what's really interesting, Ted, is the kind of psychological challenges that most athletes face. When you're in the battle, when you're in the heat of the moment, when you're in it, it's pure. It's excellent. It's amazing. When you're not in the moment, when you're not competing, when you're not at the top of the mountain about to run down, when you're not at the start line, and it's the years in between the Olympics, that's the most deafening. It's the most scary because it's kind of just you against yourself. And a lot of time is spent in solitude. A lot of time is spent talking to yourself and having those internal introspective conversations. And I think every athlete will say that you will always be your greatest advocate and strength. And your mind is like a knife. It can carve and create the most beautiful tools, and it can also stab you right in the back. And it can be very devastating. So for those of us who have not had the ability to, I think, mitigate some of those natural human responses and reactions to what's happening, whether it's fear, insecurity, doubt, depression. It's hard. And at the time, and I don't fault people for this, just by how I operate, there was no resources, right? We just didn't, I don't even think that people thought about it in that way, that, hey, these athletes will have a life after sport. Hey, some of these athletes are struggling right now, and they may be producing results that give us the funding to help to continue this entire cycle going. Because above the Olympic spirit and above the Olympic ethos is a business. And that business is in the realm of broadcasting, in television, in sponsorships, in geopolitical conversations, in funding for these massive, massive games, and funding for the athletes. And previously it was run like a business, and that business was in the business of winning medals. And so therefore, if your star pupils and athletes are no longer winning medals, you have to scramble to find the next generation of athletes who is going to replace that individual in person so that you can go and secure those sponsorships and create that cycle again and again. And we as athletes don't even think about that when we're competing. It's not even entering into our brain cells. It's just, we're thinking about how to be our best. And depending on the sport, you're given certain pressures and certain leniency towards certain activities and behaviors that you normally wouldn't have, I think, in a normal, typical environment. So I like the doc for two reasons. One, Ted, because it's highlighting an issue that has existed for a long time. It is rampant across the sport of the Olympics. I think the amount of dedication, time, and energy spent towards performing towards these Olympic events and performances is perhaps some of the highest in the world in terms of time allotment and volume. So many athletes are not going to school. Many athletes are uneducated. Many athletes have sacrificed everything from personal relationships, societal relationships, personal development and growth, and obviously education in order to pursue this one sole craft and creative expression of who they are. And with that comes consequences. So the film highlights all of those things. It gives this transparent lens into athletes like Michael, athletes like Bodie, athletes like Sasha Cohen and Jeremy Bloom and Shaun White. And it helps them take off the armor that exists and shows them that they are just like you and I. They are just like any other human being who have instead been able to focus on one sole craft their entire life. But at their core essence, they're human beings. And so regardless of their genetic ability or their dedication towards a sport, these people have brains, and these brains can be, manipulated or changed by any number of things, like anyone else can. And so that's why I thought it was really important, is that these things and these issues have existed for a long time. And basically it's a plea for help, right?
Yeah. And as you listed the athletes, including yourself, there's something that it's always struck me over my lifetime, having the chance to be at the last 11 Olympics, and that the Olympics have changed. And there are sports that are in the Olympics, like basketball, probably the most prominent, hockey in the Winter Games, for example, sports where those are professionals playing and they have their own professional careers to pursue outside of the Olympics. Every athlete you just referenced, Apolo, including yourself, that's in this doc, is in what I call true Olympic sports, where the Olympic gold is the pinnacle, right? That's the greatest achievement. And it strikes me that it's not coincidental that every athlete that you've talked about, every athlete that's in this doc, that's talking about that pressure, the post-Olympic depression, is coming from a true Olympic sport where, as you lined up for your 500-meter race in Torino, what was it, 45 seconds, that were going to define the last 8, 12 years of work you'd put in.
And it's the metric that we use and we choose to have. And we've got athletes, and you know this story better than anybody, Ted. Like, we train 4, 8, 12, sometimes 16 years of your life for this one moment in time. You've made the Olympic team. You're in peak physical and mental condition. And if you don't get that chance to be absolutely perfect, and if you don't execute to be absolutely perfect, you probably won't win, because the difference between first and fourth is like hundredths of a second, which is like 2 finger snaps, right? People have gone by. And so you're either the most celebrated person on the cover of Sports Illustrated, on the cover of Wheeze boxes, and promoting and doing speaking engagements, or you're fourth. And unless for some, higher power says your story was so powerful, NBC decides to concentrate on that and highlight that, the American public doesn't pay attention. They want to know the medal count. They want to know that. That's the metric to know that you're winning. And that's the metric that we've chosen to use in this realm. So it's interesting, because I know athletes who've won gold who actually didn't get what they thought was going to be accompanying with that process. Right. And I can name names of people who've won gold medals in 2002 and 2006, and people be like, I don't know who that person is. What sport is that person? Didn't watch that race. So there was this belief that you win gold and your life is set. Somewhat financially, you thought that you'd have access to making a significant amount of money, but that's just not true. Now, some people, and I have been in that realm, been very blessed to be able to make a good living from those accolades, but it is nothing in comparison to a professional sport contract. I mean, it is fractions of that. And I think that's a big surprising element to help people recognize that, look, we're not subsidized by the government. All of this whole system is subsidized through sponsorship and through partners who then fund the national governing bodies like a US Speed Skating or a USA Track and Field or a USA Cycling. And those monies trickle down to the coaches, to the head coaches, to the performance coaches, to the to the access to the arena and the equipment. They pay for your competition to go compete, but the athletes themselves are not receiving financial benefit. We are not paid a salary to be a part of Team USA, which is also the beauty of why we watch the games. It's because we know that's not, it's not nothing to do with what people are doing out there. They're doing this purely for the love of sport.
Yeah.
And that's why the doc is so important, Ted, is because of that. There's the other side of the medal that we fail to lift up and turn over. Because when we watch someone on television and we see this incredible display of athleticism and beauty and grace and championship grit, resiliency mentality that we strive to be, like that we as a country love the embodiment of those attributes that make up an Olympic champion. We love them. We fail to peek behind the curtain. And behind that curtain is sometimes a very traumatic experience or process that occurred to get there, as with many people who go through life. And I think that has to be highlighted because there are those who have been able to figure out that part of their life and then move on. And there are those who have not. And that is the impetus. And I think that is the essence of what this film, The Weight of Gold, is all about.
Okay, that's great. I want to get back to that last point in a second. Did you mask this stuff? Because again, watching you and seeing you and again, trials and Olympics mostly, I would sit there and say, I never suspected that you were dealing with those kinds of things. So behind the curtain, were you?
This is a game of who has the best poker face.
Yeah.
And as you know, in short track speed skating, and I'm sure across all sports, you never show weakness. You never show vulnerability. That was the thought process. That's what we were taught. That's what I was conditioned to believe, that I wanted to show my competitors and the world, even my coaches, that I was indestructible. How are you feeling today, Apolo? I'm okay. No, besides this hole in my leg, but other than that, I'm totally fine. Right? I mean, that's the psychology that exists, right? And I think as we understand neuroscience and human psychology more and more, and how all of us operate and why we do what we do, the vulnerability is very powerful. And I really commend, Michael for being front and center for doing that. I commend Jeremy Bloom for being open and transparent about their wins and their shortcomings and their losses that they have not been able to bounce back from, and our own insecurities and things that drove us. So did I hide those things? I mean, every day, I still deal with those things today, where I have to come to a realization of, Apolo, this is your authentic self. It is okay that you feel this way. But it is a habit that is hard to break, because that I call it self one, which is the Olympic self of Apolo. When I'm talking about myself, I was conditioned a certain way to never show any kind of weaknesses. And it's so funny to think about that, because there's benefits to that. There's strength in that. And it's what makes, I think, a lot of these athletes. But I guarantee you, behind every superhero and every athlete in the world lies a plethora of complexities that are very difficult to navigate. And a part of that reason of those complexities is probably why they have skewed to be so obsessed and so focused and so intertwined of process to be the absolute, highest level.
So I want to pivot to a moment of success for you. And it's a story I tell all the time. And I think it's probably the most profound Olympic moment that I had the chance to be witness to and actually call. And it's in Torino. And 2 nights before the final night of competition, Apolo agrees to do an interview with me for NBC to help promote this last night, which is the 500 meters in short track. It's the signature night, and it's purposely on the last night for that reason. Apolo says in the interview, you talk incredibly intelligently about skating the perfect race. 2 nights later, you skate so well in the prelims, you earn the lane 1 position, which you earned. And that's extremely advantageous in the 500. You had the perfect start. You win the gold wire to wire. And I sat there, I remember calling it live going, my God, that was the perfect race. And if anything defines what I've taken out of this doc, the trailers I've seen, which are the line 40 seconds dictates our human lives. I forget the exact time, but it was about 40 seconds. Probably
about 40 seconds.
45. Is that an exaggeration? Did that 40 seconds dictate your life?
So I think it's a great question. That's how we look at it.
Hmm.
And that's what it feels like, is that I've trained for 10 years of my life for this race that is 40 seconds long, that can change the way that you live your life moving forward, or you're going to have to go find a job pretty damn fast. Right. I was able to make that race happen in my favor. But there's 4 other guys who were on the start line with me who didn't. And I often wonder, like, what would have happened if I didn't win that race and I didn't win gold? Would I have even gone for another Olympics in Vancouver? Would I ever have retired? Like, would I have been on Dancing with the Stars in 2007? Would that have changed? I mean, it's so interesting to see how the most minute and minutia of decisions can radically alter the direction of our life. So when I said that in the doc, it was important for me to relate to the audience who's watching that we think about these things as the 40-second race is a roll of the dice for many of us. And you're harnessing all of your power mentally and physically on this one moment to where the outcome is not entirely within your control. That's a huge gamble. And you are now signaling to yourself that unless I win this gold, unless I win this medal, it is not enough for me to be recognized and celebrated by this country. That's pretty hard. It's really hard to deal with. And it's also a reality. That's why there's only 3 spots on the podium. That's why, when you go to like some of these new schools today that give out like medals down to the 111th place. Okay, like I understand the concept there. Is it important to teach kids about winning and losing? Because I believe it's more than just about that process of the Olympic Games. And that's why we love the games. There's only 3 spots. It's the top 0.001% of every country around the world who has sent their absolute best to see who is the best on that day. And it's challenging. So I thought about that. I remember that interview. What you didn't know about me then, Ted, which I probably shielded very well, was the thousands of times that I was replaying a previous race, the 1,000 meters, in which I got bronze. And it deeply, deeply scarred me because 2 nights before that 1,000 meter final,
this is 1,000 in Torino?
In Torino.
Okay.
In that 2 days before the final in the 1,000 in Torino, I had a dream that I actually won gold, and I skated the race a very specific strategic way. And then when I raced the day of the final, I had raced it slightly different, and I hesitated for about a half a lap in terms of trying to make my move. And that hesitation, I believe, caused me to go from first to third. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who was our team sports psychologist the day after, and he could see both the disappointment in my face and the hunger that I wanted, because I wasn't supposed to win the 500 meters. I had not been skating 500 meter competitions very well all season. And it had to be the reason why I said I had to skate the perfect race is because I had to have the perfect lane position for everyone else. So if the lane positions of everyone else in the 500 meter final in Torino would have been one off, if Hyun-Soo Ahn was in lane 2, Badar was in lane 5, John Henry was in lane 3, and if Tremblay was in lane 4, I probably wouldn't have won the race. And so that's why I said, like, and I was almost kind of telling you, I need a miracle. It has to be perfect, in my favor, perfect. And it happened to go my way. And so that 40 seconds can dictate your entire life, because I wonder what I would have done psychologically had I not been able to achieve that. And I don't know if I would be able to recover from that, because I don't know what that feels like. Now, we're trained to be able to bounce back from failures and bounce back from these kind of, what we call losses, and create learning lessons and grow from these things. But man, it is that the games is that. And the US, we love that about the Olympics. I love that about the Olympics. That you prepare a lifetime for a moment in which you hold your breath and you watch this race. And it's only 40 seconds long. How can 40 seconds dictate the rest of your life? And from a long view, it doesn't. It's a part of one of the chapters in your life. And then in a short view, it absolutely does. And it feels like that's the most important thing in your life. And that if you win or you lose, if you get a medal or you don't, is either utter complete failure or it's this triumphant victory that will live and resonate on for the rest of your life.
And and that's funny. I would have never taken that. To me, it was visualization. You know,
Mm.
you had this expectation, this dream, and you visualized skating the perfect race. And what I've most admired about watching your career was this Torino. And I didn't know, obviously, didn't know that about the 1,000 in Torino. But to take this 4 years after Salt Lake City, where out of your control in the 1,000 that you have a hell of a shot to win the gold in, somebody tries a crazy pass, wipes out the field, you make a remarkable recovery bouncing off the pads to put your blade across the line to win silver, which was extraordinary. Yet, the, none of us, we can only imagine what the disappointment must be like for that minute and a half that you thought was going to define your life to be taken out by something out of your control.
Mm-hmm. And short track speed skating is that. And so when you say, the visualization of the 500 meters, I mean, don't get me wrong. I visualized thousands of times.
Yeah.
I replayed what I wanted to happen. I tried to manifest that reality in its essence. And even then, sometimes that's just not enough. Hence the 1,000 meters in my first Olympic Games, my first Olympic final. I'm leading with a quarter of a lap remaining. Boom. All of a sudden, I'm thrown into the pads. I cut myself. I radically get up immediately to try to throw my blades across the finish line, because in speed skating, you measure the time by your blade and not by your chest, like track and field. And so you have to throw my blades across the finish line. I don't even know what place I got. I have no idea what just happened. And it was out of my control. And I think that lesson from nearly 20 years ago, right? That lesson from that moment still is powerful within me today. We prepare a lifetime for a moment. We feel that we are the most deserving to win that moment. We are the most prepared in that moment. And something happens and it's out of our control. And we're wiped out. We are thrown into the pads. We're injured. We're hurt mentally and physically. And we're having to figure out what to do and how to respond versus react. And it's not easy, just like COVID-19, right? Everyone in January of 2020, I, like everyone else, had these massive goals that I had for this year, that we all had for this year. It was going to be a great year. It was going to be lined up. We're everyone's gearing up. And then like that, boom, we get injured. We're physically and mentally thrown into the pads. We're knocked down. And there's no shot to win this race. And we have to scramble and get up and reinvent and pivot and change our tune mentally and physically in order to continue on and carry that struggle further, regardless of whatever that finish is going to be. So the beauty in sport is that it's got these life lessons intertwined, I'd like to think about, that can really be correlated with how life is. And short track speed skating to me is one of those things where, man, it doesn't even matter how good you are and how prepared you are. Sometimes things are out of your control. And the only thing that is within your control is how you're going to respond to those things. And so that's been a huge learning lesson for me that I carry with me today.
So the film, and I want to pivot out of it to the Olympic Games, but this last point, because talking about, right, post-Olympic transitions. I spent 2 weeks with you in Korea, and I learned more about cryptocurrency listening to you.
Yeah.
And I could never hear the other end of the conversations, obviously, but
Yeah.
listening to you, and then, of course, at various conversations through the course of time, I learned more about cryptocurrency in 2 weeks to understand that you understood. You weren't faking this. So how did you make this, again, the subject of this film, how do you transition out of a sport where it has no professional career into another career?
So I think, in regards to all the conversations that you probably were listening to me have, but I was still figuring it out. I am definitely no expert in any realm. I was fascinated by that technology, by blockchain. I still am. And I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for many companies around the world to adopt, to create this powerful system of these digital ledgers across all areas of what they do. But more importantly, the transition that occurs from an athlete. One thing that I think that I consider myself blessed to be experiencing was when I retired in 2010, immediately after, I became really curious about the world. And I wanted to explore, I want entrepreneurship, I wanted to understand diverse cultures, I wanted to spend time in Asia to see, feel, and do, and just experience and learn from people and areas of the world that had these boom cycles of economic activity. And I also was deathly afraid and had a fear of failure. Now, with that fear of failure, because of the sport that I was in, I was never afraid to go and take the risk, to go out there on my own, to learn. And I feel blessed in that regard. But the transition is not easy. I still to this day, Ted, deal with the transitory challenge of Apollo, you are no longer this Olympic athlete who used to skate on these things, right? These samurai blades. Like, you are a person who's got interests and love and direction in other areas of their life. And you have to polish that facet of that diamond. They've always been there. And as we grow and mold and change, those are elements. So the transition is challenging because an athlete goes into this relationship with sport and then falls in love with sport. It teaches the athlete everything there is about strength and resiliency and hard work and dedication, how to win and how to lose, how to reinvent, how to pivot, like in short track,
Mhm.
on all these things. And then all of a sudden, either the athlete decides to retire or the sport retires them. The great divorce happens. And your first true love and the person who you thought would always nurture you and share and shower you with strength and energy and direction tells you, no matter what you do, you're not welcome back here. I am no longer interested in you. I have a younger suitor who's more attractive, better story, bigger sponsorships, has more genetic ability, is just better than you in every way. And there's nothing that you can do. And so now the athlete wakes up the next day after the opening ceremonies or after the closing ceremonies. And if they won, it's different because they go on this huge media circus for the next 6 months. And if they didn't win, they wake up and they go back home, and there's no coach, there's no training program, there's no structure. I call them, there's no guardrails. And you're this pinball in this machine that's not contained in this machine. Those guardrails are now flat. And so whatever you used previously in your life to help propel you in sport, whether it was rage, insecurity, fear, doubt, anger, pure alpha and drive, those things are no longer protected by those guardrails you can bounce back and forth and still reach your target. Now life has no guardrails. You're just kind of going all over the place trying to explore. So I think a lot of athletes experience this. I have myself. And identifying the core attributes and strengths that you recognize and that you love and know are really important to helping you transition and see that these skills are transferable. You're not going to be an expert in some of these realms and spaces that you enter, and that's okay. I think more importantly is, what is the learning lessons that you're going to acquire? How are you going to live your life? And how are you going to continue to grow? Because it's a lifelong learning process. And the Olympics happen to be 1 or 2 chapters in your 100-chapter book. They can be the most beneficial. And if you take from those lessons and apply them towards the next phase of your life, and the hard work, the discipline, the teamwork element, the leadership element, the resiliency, the grit, the grind, the visualization, the planning, the structure, those are all things when a company is looking at hiring someone who's a star coworker and employee, that's what we would want to bring in. But we as athletes didn't know that. We feel like all I know how to do is go in circles. All I know how to do is wrestle. All I know how to do in the most comfortable environment that I'm in is in the pool. That's where I thrive. I don't thrive in a boardroom. I don't thrive in the new business in this digital era. I don't know what to do there. So it takes some learning. It takes some guidance. It definitely takes some mentorship. And I think life outside of sport requires all of the same things that are required in sport. You need a great coach or mentor or guide. You need a great structure, routine, program, training schedule. You got to still move your body in some capacity. You got to take care of yourself in terms of your mental structure, and your health and fitness is directly tied to how hard you can push every day. You got to be able to detach and then re-engage again. So it took me a long time to realize that, Ted. And I feel blessed to be able to feel like I've got a better handle on it now, and also recognize that I don't have all the answers, and just always continue to pursue my passions. And then I get a lot of pleasure out of helping other people, helping other athletes, helping other businesses recognize how to kind of unlock the positive attributes of having a gold medal mindset. And whatever that is, it's very personal, right? So how do I help you perform to your utmost personal potential and help you recognize, in fact, just how strong you are? And it's taken me many failures to go through that process.
That that analogy of the first divorce is phenomenal. I've never heard that. That is so. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking of all the other sports I've been a part of and listening to athletes go through that same time when the sport basically eliminates them.
Yeah.
To have that phrase that way. Okay, have you been able to help any other athletes deal with the 1 year delay, even though it's winter versus summer? But I'm just same concept, right? Have you been able to talk to athletes about that?
I have talked to a couple athletes about that. And surprisingly, some of them have been very responsive in saying like, okay, I have another year, right? I have another year of preparation. I haven't spoken to too many of the veterans, although I had a brief conversation with Allison Felix, who, I mean, it's crazy to think she's a veteran,
Yeah.
because she's still so young. But people have to also recognize, like, athletes peak once every 4 years. So everything that we do is garnered and dedicated towards this 1 year. And now that's 1 year delayed. If you are a veteran in your sport, if you are delaying that 1 year, your legs may not have another 12 months of training. It's a lot of pounding on your body and damage that occurs. So it is something that I think that is really, really, it's hard for athletes. And so my message to them has always been disengage, right? Recognize that the control over when that event is going to be is now out of your control. Allow yourself to come to terms with the fact that you have another year. And then what we call climb out onto the balcony, survey the land in front of you so you can have a clear vision of what the end goal here really still is. And then re-engage when you're ready with a new, refreshed sense of focus, energy, and then take care of yourself. Like, the recovery and regeneration is everything. And I'm talking about mentally. Mm-hmm. Mentally, you need to allow your body and your mind, most importantly, to detach in a way that allows you to then, when you refocus, you've recalibrated and you've got a new focal point, you've got a new target, you've got a new date. And that is going to be your chance to shine again.
You would probably understand this. And my little exposure where I live at the very beginning of the virus was with Katie Ledecky and Simone Manuel, the champion swimmers. And I know they were very strong on wanting the postponement. And they felt that their 4 year push to be prepared for this July was now thrown off.
Right.
And they didn't want, and I'm paraphrasing, but they didn't want to compete without being at their best. And they also understood that a lot of the competitors wouldn't be at their best either. And they thought that wasn't right. So it was fascinating. It was all channeled to that 4 year cycle of being prepared. You shake your head. You understand that totally.
I get it totally. And it's tough, right? Because some of these athletes are like, I am so dialed in. I need the games to happen or I won't be at my absolute best. And some athletes are like, oh, maybe I'm actually not that prepared. I could use another extra year. But I think it's good that the decision needed to be made to give the athletes the comfort to know, hey, this thing's still happening. It's now delayed 1 year and you can refocus. So it's a good thing to have when you at least your target. It's hard to shoot for something when you're blindfolded and you don't know if it's going to happen. It's very, very unsettling.
And your explanation of that Darwinian evolution in sport is also part of this, because there may be that young skater, that young athlete who's not quite ready 2020, has a heck of a shot to be more ready in 2021.
If Phelps had another year, so Phelps's first games was when he was 15 years old.
Right.
If he had another year, imagine if those games were delayed, Phelps may have won a medal at the age of 16. Think about that. He may have won his first Olympic medals and maybe he would have been dominating already. So a year is a long time for athletes, especially when you're young and you're coming up through the ranks. for me, it was the difference between my performances in 1997 versus 1998 were radical. They were radical. So again, you can create miracles in a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, a good place to button this up now, Apollo. I've seen very little conversation, very little talk about the fact we are only 19 months away from Beijing 2022, the next Winter Games. And we understand why there's been so little conversation about it, but way past the halfway mark in the world in which we're presently living, that's complicated enough. Then you throw in the present relationships back and forth between the United States and China. As you sit back as an Olympian, just give me your broad view of thinking we're 19 months away from the next Winter Games.
And we're 19 months away from the next Winter Games. They're in Beijing, there's the obvious kind of geopolitical challenges that everyone is facing and the unknowns surrounding that. We were talking offline a bit about hearing some of the chatter of if these relationships don't improve, there will be talk of what happens if there's a potential boycott. What does that look like for the athletes? I don't want to even put it out there. I don't want athletes to even think in that way, but it's happened before. And it's something that as we go through these things, I hope and I pray that people use sport as a way to elevate where we are. We use sport as a way, as the center plate to say, hey, we're all competing on this planet and we can set aside our differences for this time frame. And that's what I hopefully, that's what I want to see the Olympic Games used for, is this incredible display of athleticism and teamwork and camaraderie, and to showcase that the athletes are friends across the board here, and that they can be integrated, whether it's in sport, whether it's out of sport, whether it's just watching sports. It's a powerful thing. And, I hope that happens. And it's also interesting to see that the Tokyo Games is so close now to the Beijing Games. So, we may see a spectator-free Olympics in Tokyo. What does that look like? Do some athletes perform well? Do some athletes not perform well? For me, when I first Olympic Games that I went to in Salt Lake City, 17,000 screaming Americans in those stands, I didn't know what was going on. That was, and I can't imagine if it was completely silent. It may feel like a World Cup to me. It may not have felt like the Olympics. So there's a lot of variables here that are not within people's control, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, that's why I treasure having had the chance to know you for so long and to hear you speak so intelligently about a lot of these topics, Apollo. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.